So, Charles Spencer just dropped a piece of paper on a Thursday morning that basically did what 30 years of Palace Prairie couldn't do, which is prove that the entire story we were told about Princess Diana and Princess Anne was wrong. Not like partially wrong or missing some details, just music completely fundamentally the opposite of what actually happened. And the way it all came out is almost as music interesting as what the letter actually says, because the timing of this reveal, the specific details about how the letter was delivered, and the fact that there are apparently 2 copies of this document sitting in different vaults across England, none of that is an accident. This was a coordinated release, and the palace legal team apparently spent an entire night trying to figure out if they could stop it before realizing they had absolutely zero grounds to do anything about it. So let's start with the box, because the visual of this moment is honestly kind of cinematic. Charles Spencer's sitting in the library at Althorpe House, which is the Spencer family estate, Music, in Northamptonshire. And if you've ever seen photos of this place, it looks exactly like what you'd imagine an English, Music, aristocratic library to look like. Tall windows, thousands of leather-bound books, that specific kind of morning light that makes everything look like a period drama. He's sitting at this heavy walnut desk, and there's a mahogany box that was just retrieved from a secure vault underneath the actual foundation stones of the mansion. Like not a filing cabinet in the basement, a vault under the foundation. He puts on white cotton archival gloves, which is a detail that matters because it tells you this isn't a casual family photo album situation. Music, this is document preservation protocol. He takes out an iron key, turns in the brass lock, and inside this box lined with faded blue silk is a single sheet of light blue writing paper. And the date on that paper is August 10th, 1997, which if you know your timeline is exactly 21 days before Diana died in Paris. That date alone changes the weight of every single word on that page. Before we get deeper into this, if you're enjoying this breakdown and want more royal family analysis, hit that subscribe button and join us here at Crown Watch. We're covering these stories as they develop, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, the letter itself. Music. The paper has the embossed red crest of Kensington Palace at the top, and it's covered in Diana's distinct handwriting using a black rollerball pen. And Charles Spencer didn't just find this and immediately call a press conference. He spent 48 hours working with a senior forensic document examiner from the London Probate Archives to verify that the signature was authentic before he said a single word publicly. They compared the ink pressure points and consistency, music, against hundreds of verified letters in the Spencer family repository, and the verdict came back ironclad that morning. Music. This is Diana's handwriting, Diana's words, Diana's signature. There's no ambiguity here. What she actually wrote is where this story completely dismantles everything we thought we knew about the relationship between these 2 women. For 3 decades, the standard narrative pushed by royal biographers and the press was that Diana and Anne were basically rivals. The framing was always that Diana was this high-fashion, emotionally expressive, media-savvy celebrity princess, and Anne was the no-nonsense, traditional, rural, charity-focused royal who had no patience for any of that. The assumption was, music, that they avoided each other behind closed doors and had nothing in common. This letter proves that during the absolute darkest period of her marital separation, music, when most of the aristocracy had already dropped her, Diana turned to and as her primary source of guidance and music protection. Not a friend from her social circle, not a celebrity confidant, the king's music sister, and the way she addressed her tells you everything about how close they actually were. Diana didn't use formal aristocratic titles. She addressed Anne simply as Anne Music, with an intimate tone that apparently exposed how vulnerable she was during that summer of 1997. Music, the letter outlines her growing fear about the rigid institutional protocols being used by senior courtiers to Music manage the public profile of her 2 sons, William and Harry. She wrote that she felt an urgent need to build a permanent Music independent protective barrier around the boys' emotional development, and she believed Anne was the only member of the entire Windsor household who had the raw courage to stand against the palace bureaucracy. Think about what that means. Diana looked around at every single person in that family and concluded, Music, that the one person who would actually fight for her children was the woman the press kept describing as cold and distant. Music, now, Here's where the logistics of this letter get really interesting because Diana didn't just drop it in the regular mail at Kensington Palace. Music. She knew that the central palace machinery was monitoring her correspondence during this period. Music. So she used what's being described as a highly secretive, informal postal network used by younger members of the aristocracy to bypass the senior courtiers. Music. She instructed her most trusted personal chauffeur to drive the envelope directly to the equestrian stables at Gatcombe Park, which is Anne's music private estate, and deliver it by hand to Anne's head groom under strict orders of absolute confidentiality. Music. So, this wasn't mailed. It wasn't sent through any official channel. It was hand-delivered to the stables by someone Diana trusted completely, and from there it went directly to Anne's music desk. The palace screening machinery never touched it. Charles Spencer apparently gave Clarence House a heads-up before this went public. His legal team delivered a high-resolution photocopy of the document to the King's private secretary on Wednesday afternoon as music of formal courtesy, giving them a window to review the text before the announcement. And the arrival of that folder triggered what's being described as frantic activity in the palace legal department. Senior solicitors spent the night reviewing the 1993 Royal Trust Acts, music, to see if the Crown had any statutory grounds to file an injunction blocking publication. They ultimately concluded that because the original physical letter was discovered in the private archives of Althorpe House, and because it was addressed to a private individual rather than a state official, the Crown had zero constitutional authority to suppress it. It was an independent historical artifact entirely outside the jurisdiction of the Official Secrets Act or the Royal Collection Trust. The palace lawyers had to basically tell the king's advisors, "There's nothing we can do here. This is happening." So, what was in the letter that made the palace legal team scramble like that? Diana wrote that she had discovered music, a specific administrative document, through a trusted source inside the palace registry office, just 48 hours before she sat down to write to Anne. That leaked document detailed a confidential plan by senior court officials to systematically alter her global security arrangements and reduce her personal protection detail to a minimum level with the goal of pressuring her into surrendering her independent media operations. She explicitly used the phrase administrative music trap to describe the legal mechanisms being prepared by the king's solicitors. She explained that the ultimate goal was to use an ancient clause within the 1772 Royal Marriages Act to launch a private custody dispute asserting the sovereign's overriding prerogative, music, to control the education, residence, and daily movements of William and Harry. That's not a vague fear. Music, that's a specific legal strategy she obtained details about. Music, and her primary concern wasn't her own public standing or her travel logistics. She, Music, wrote that her deepest fear was the cold institutional environment that would consume her sons if, Music, she were suddenly removed from their daily upbringing. She described the senior advisors running the central household as a corporate board of directors who viewed the young princes as functional pieces of state machinery rather than developing human beings who needed genuine parental affection. That's a devastating characterization, and it's made even more devastating by the fact that she was writing this to the king's own sister, essentially saying your family's apparatus is going to emotionally destroy my children unless someone stops it. The appeal to, and specifically, is where the letter apparently becomes almost unbearable to read. Diana wrote that she was begging and to look past the superficial court gossip that had been manufactured to divide them over the past decade. She said she chose Anne because Anne was the only member of the Windsor family who possessed the raw courage to look a reigning monarch in the eye and defend the basic human rights of a mother. She wanted and to act as an unyielding emotional barrier between her boys and the traditionalists who wanted to shape them into distant, music unfeeling symbols of the state. The forensic examination of the original manuscript actually showed that Diana spent several hours formatting this warning. The reverse side of the page has multiple corrections where she scratched out initial sentences and replaced them with more precise, legally binding language. She was making sure that if this document was ever retrieved during a future family crisis, palace attorneys couldn't dismiss it as an emotional outburst. She was building a legal record. But here's the detail that apparently sent a fresh wave of panic through Buckingham Palace on Thursday morning. In the middle of the second page, Diana referenced a secret personal repository containing over 200 original letters and diary entries from her school days and early marriage. She told, and she had hidden this repository completely outside the palace infrastructure, entirely separate from the royal archives at Windsor Castle.